I came home from a 3-day business trip to find my house transformed. My home office, where I'd spent years building my consulting business, had been converted into what Diane cheerfully called Robert's snoring room. A twin bed sat where my desk had been. Robert's CPAP machine hummed on my filing cabinet. The artwork I'd collected over years of travel had been replaced with cheap landscape prints from a discount store. We redecorated, Diane said brightly when she saw my face. The place needed updating. My husband Wesley stood in the kitchen, looking uncomfortable, but saying nothing. How long are you staying? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. Diane waved her hand dismissively. Oh, indefinitely. We're here to help with the mortgage. You two need the support. I turned to Wesley. Can we talk? Privately. He followed me upstairs. Wesley, this is too much. This is our home. You're overreacting, he said, not meeting my eyes. They're just trying to help. The next morning, I caught Diane crouched in front of my home office drawer with a bobby pin. The lock was scratched, clearly from multiple attempts to pick it. What are you doing? My voice came out sharper than intended. Diane jumped, dropping the bobby pin. Her hands were trembling. Oh, I was just looking for spare keys. Robert locked himself out of the bathroom. The bathroom doesn't lock from the outside. Well, I must have misunderstood him. She laughed nervously. You know how he gets confused. I looked at the drawer she'd been trying to open. Inside were my private financial documents, my prenuptial agreement, information about my trust fund, things I'd kept locked away for a reason. Maybe you should ask me next time you need something, I said. Diane's smile was tight. Of course, dear. I didn't mean to intrude. But her eyes said something different. They said she knew exactly what was in that drawer. And she wanted it badly. My phone rang that afternoon. A known number. I almost didn't answer. Ms. Whitmore. A man's voice, professional but unfamiliar. This is she. I'm calling to inquire about the status of the Brighton account. We're hoping to finalize paperwork this week. My blood went cold. Brighton was the code name my lawyer used for my trust fund. Only 3 people knew that name. Me, my lawyer, and my trustee. Who is this? How did you get this number? The line went dead. I immediately called my lawyer, Judith. Someone just called asking about Brighton. They had my personal number. Judith was quiet for a moment. That's concerning. That information isn't public. Someone with access to your files must have shared it. I thought about Diane's trembling hands. About her attempts to pick my lock. Can you check if anyone has been making inquiries? I'll look into it immediately. That evening, I called the condo association where Robert and Diane supposedly lived. Hi, I'm calling about the water damage from the pipe burst in Unit 4B. I'm sorry, what pipe burst? The manager asked. We haven't had any water damage in months. Are you sure? Robert and Diane Morrison. They said their unit was flooded 2 weeks ago. The Morrisons? Their unit is fine. They're actually here right now, in fact. I just saw them at the mailboxes. I thanked her and hung up. There had never been a pipe burst. They'd lied about why they needed to stay with us. When Wesley came home, I confronted him. Your parents lied about the flooding. I called their condo association. Wesley's face went pale. I must have misunderstood them. You must have misunderstood that their entire home was flooded? Maybe it wasn't as bad as they said. Maybe they just needed a break. But his voice wavered. He knew he was lying. The next day, Diane insisted on helping me organize old photos. She pulled out an album I'd never seen before. These are from Robert's business days, she said, flipping through pages. Then she stopped on a particular photo. It showed Robert, Diane, and Wesley at a charity gala. Standing with them, wearing an elegant evening gown, was my Aunt Beatrice. My reclusive aunt who avoided public events. Who I rarely saw. When was this taken? I asked, keeping my voice casual. Oh, years ago. Before you and Wesley met. But that didn't make sense. Aunt Beatrice had inherited a substantial fortune from my grandmother. She was notoriously private, never attending public events. How did Wesley's family know her well enough to attend a gala together? How did you know my aunt? I pressed. Diane's smile faltered.
Charity circuit, dire.
Everyone knows everyone. But her hand shook as she closed the album. I took a long lunch the next day and drove to Judith's office. I told her I was going to a work meeting. Someone has been making inquiries, Judith confirmed, sliding documents across her desk. Multiple calls over the past 3 weeks asking about the structure of your trust, when you'll have full access, what the conditions are. Who was calling? They claimed to be financial advisors you'd hired. But when I asked for verification, they hung up. Judith leaned forward. Lauren, this is serious. Someone is trying to get information about your inheritance, given the timing of your in-laws moving in. She didn't need to finish. I understood. What should I do? First, we secure everything. Change all passwords, add additional verification requirements. Second, we figure out who's behind this and what they want. I left her office feeling paranoid. But maybe paranoia was appropriate right now. That night, I went looking for my prenuptial agreement. I kept it in a fireproof box in my closet. The box was still there, but the contents had been disturbed. Documents were in the wrong order. My prenup had clearly been photocopied. There were faint marks on it from a copier. I confronted Wesley immediately. Did you go through my financial documents? He had the decency to look guilty. My parents asked to see them. They wanted to give us financial advice. Financial advice? Wesley, those are private legal documents. They're my parents. They're just trying to help us plan for the future. By photocopying my prenup without asking? Wesley shifted uncomfortably. They didn't photocopy anything. There are copier marks on the pages. He was quiet for a long moment. Okay, fine. Dad wanted to understand our financial situation. He's worried about us. Worried or interested? I hired a private investigator named Gordon. He came highly recommended for background checks. I need you to look into Robert and Diane Morrison, I told him. Specifically their residential history and any legal issues. Gordon's first report arrived in 3 days. It was damning. Robert and Diane had moved 7 times in the past 10 years. Each move followed legal disputes with landlords or neighbors. Unpaid rent. Property damage. Small claims court judgments. They're professional house guests, Gordon said when we met. They move in with people, overstay their welcome, and leave destruction in their wake. What about criminal records? Nothing major. But there's a pattern of civil suits. Always settled out of court. Always involving money they owed someone. I thought about them taking over my house. About Diane's attempts to access my financial files. They weren't just annoying in-laws. They were dangerous. Diane clutched her chest dramatically during dinner. I can't breathe. Robert, call 911. I grabbed my phone but Diane stopped me. No. Just need my pills. They're upstairs. She looked at me. Lauren, could you run to the pharmacy? I'm out of refills. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't refuse a medical emergency. I grabbed my keys and drove to the 24-hour pharmacy. The pharmacist had no record of any prescriptions for Diane Morrison. I called the house. No answer. I drove back faster than I should have. When I opened the front door, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I found Robert in my office, sitting at my computer. My financial files were open on the screen. What are you doing? Robert jumped, nearly knocking over my coffee mug. I was just checking email. On my computer? With my files open. I got confused. Thought this was Wesley's computer. But we both knew he was lying. Gordon's second report arrived a week later. You need to see this, he said, handing me a thick folder. Inside was information about Wesley's ex-fiancée, Paige. She'd been engaged to Wesley 5 years before we met. She'd inherited a substantial amount when her grandmother died. Within 6 months of meeting Wesley's parents, she'd lost everything. What happened to her? I asked. Gordon pointed to financial records. Joint accounts with Wesley were drained. Investments she made on their advice went bad. By the time they broke up, she was in debt. Did she report them? She tried. But they'd covered their tracks well. Everything looked like legitimate bad luck or poor decisions on her part. He pulled out another document. But here's what's interesting. Robert and Diane's address at that time? The charity that employed your Aunt Beatrice's foundation. My mouth went dry. They targeted Paige through her family connections. Just like they're targeting you. I found Paige through social media and asked to meet. She agreed, though she looked nervous. We met at a coffee shop in a different part of the city. Wesley's parents, Paige said, stirring her coffee without drinking it. They're not what they seem. Tell me everything. She did. The pattern was identical to what was happening to me. Love bombing from Wesley. His parents moving in to help. Slowly taking over her life. Pressuring her to make financial decisions that benefited them. They knew about my inheritance before Wesley and I even met, Paige said. Diane worked at the charity my grandmother supported. She had access to donor records. That's how she knew I was inheriting. How did you get away? I didn't. They got what they wanted and left. I lost everything. Paige looked at me with tired eyes. Get out now, Lauren. Before they take everything from you too. I bought a voice-activated recorder and hid it behind a picture frame in the living room. That night, while I pretended to sleep upstairs, I listened through headphones to the live feed. Diane and Robert were talking in low voices. The timeline needs to move faster, Diane said. She's getting suspicious. We need access to the Brighton funds first, Robert replied. Once we have that, we can disappear. Wesley's been too slow. We need to push him harder. He's weak. Always has been. But he'll do what we tell him. My hands clenched around my phone. They were using my husband. And Wesley was letting them. The recording continued for another hour. Plans to pressure me into giving them financial access. Discussions about forging documents if necessary. Everything I needed to prove this was intentional. Calculated. Criminal. I created fake documents at work the next day. Legal papers showing complications with my trust fund. Requirements that needed to be met before I could access the money. Language that made it sound like the whole thing might collapse if we weren't careful. I left them accidentally on my desk at home, slightly visible under other papers. It took less than an hour. I came back from making lunch to find Diane in my office, reading the fake documents. She pretended to be organizing when I walked in. But I'd placed the papers in a specific way. They'd been moved. Everything okay? I asked innocently. Diane smiled. Just straightening up. You're so messy, dear. That evening, she brought it up. Casually, like she was just making conversation. I couldn't help but notice some legal papers on your desk. Is everything all right with the family trust? Just some complications. Nothing serious. What kind of complications? Legal stuff. Boring. But Diane pressed harder. And harder. Until finally she suggested. Maybe you need a good lawyer. We know someone excellent. The pressure from Diane intensified over the next few days. You really should talk to our lawyer, she said at breakfast. He's wonderful with trust fund issues. At lunch, we could arrange an introduction. He's very discreet. At dinner. Time is important with these legal matters. You shouldn't wait. Finally, I agreed. Diane set up the meeting herself, looking triumphant. The lawyer's name was Harold Finch. His office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. Red flag number 1. He had no paralegal, no receptionist. Red flag number 2. And when I asked about his experience with trusts, his answers were vague and generic. Red flag number 3. I played along. Fed him false information about my trust. Mentioned fake complications and made up restrictions. Harold took notes eagerly, promising he could solve everything. When I left, I had everything I needed. Harold wasn't a real trust attorney. He was part of their scheme. I hired a forensic accountant named Patricia. She specialized in tracking hidden money. Look at everything connected to Wesley and his parents, I told her. Bank accounts, credit cards, investments. Anything you can find. Patricia worked fast. Within a week, she had preliminary findings. Your husband has been moving money, she said, showing me transaction records. Small amounts at first. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. But it adds up. Where is it going? Offshore accounts. 3 of them. All linked to corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. And guess who's listed as the beneficial owners? Let me guess. Robert and Diane Morrison. Exactly. Patricia pulled up more documents. He's been doing this for about 6 months. Right around when his parents started talking about visiting. 6 months. They'd been planning this for half a year. The pipe burst. The temporary stay. All of it was a long con. Gordon called me at work with an update. I found 2 other victims. Women who were involved with Wesley before you and Paige. My stomach turned. How many people has he done this to? At least 4 that I can confirm. Probably more. The pattern is always the same. Wesley meets a woman with money. His parents move in. They drain the accounts and disappear. Will these women talk to me? I asked. They're willing to help build a case, but they're traumatized. None of them want to go public yet. Gordon paused. But they did provide documents. Bank records showing the same offshore accounts. Photos showing Robert and Diane at charity events where they met their targets. It's enough to establish a pattern. Can we use this for criminal charges? Possibly. But we need more evidence of intent. Proof that they planned this from the beginning. I thought about my voice recorder. About the conversations I'd captured. I'm working on that. I tested them. Told the family over dinner that the trust fund was almost accessible. That there was just one more legal hurdle to clear. Diane's eyes lit up. What kind of hurdle? A signature requirement. I need to verify my identity with the trustee in person. When can you do that? Soon. Maybe next week. Robert leaned forward. Is there any way to speed it up? Bypass some of the bureaucracy. I pretended to think about it. I don't know. The trust has strict rules. Rules can be flexible, Diane said smoothly. Especially with family money. Your grandmother wouldn't want you tied up in red tape. I turned on my phone's recording app under the table. For the next hour, they pressured me. Suggested ways to bypass legal safeguards. Offered to connect me with experts who could help. All of it recorded. All of it evidence. I started looking for a beach house. Somewhere far from the city. Somewhere they couldn't find me. I used a shell company I'd set up through Judith's office. Paid cash so there would be no mortgage trail. The house was perfect. Small but comfortable. Right on the water. Most importantly, it was titled to my LLC, not to me personally. There was no way to connect it to Lauren Whitmore. Over the next 3 weeks, I moved my most valuable possessions there. Bit by bit. My jewelry. My important documents. My grandmother's china. Art that meant something to me. I told Wesley I was donating things to charity. He didn't care enough to ask questions. Each trip to the beach house felt like freedom. Like I was building an escape hatch. By the time I was done, everything I valued was safe. Everything I needed was ready. All that remained was timing the final move. I created a fake legal letter on an official-looking letterhead. It stated that due to unforeseen complications, the trust fund was at risk of being permanently frozen. That I might lose access to the inheritance entirely. I left it on the kitchen counter where I knew Diane would find it. The reaction was immediate and explosive. What is this? Diane demanded, waving the letter when I came downstairs. My lawyer sent it. There's a problem with trust. What kind of problem? Legal challenges. My cousin is contesting the inheritance structure. Robert joined us, reading over Diane's shoulder. This says you could lose everything. I know. The mask slipped. Diane's face twisted with rage. You need to fix this. Now. I don't know if I can. You will fix this, she hissed. We've put too much time into. She caught herself, but it was too late. Wesley stood in the doorway, finally seeing his parents for what they were. I worked with Gordon to compile everything. The recordings of their conversations. Patricia's financial documents showing the money Wesley had moved. Harold's fake legal advice. Photos of them at charity events targeting wealthy donors. Paige's testimony about what they'd done to her. Statements from the other victims. It was overwhelming. Undeniable. This is enough for criminal fraud charges, Gordon said. Conspiracy, identity theft, probably more. The district attorney will love this case. How long until we can file? I need another week to finalize everything. But Lauren, you need to protect yourself in the meantime. These people are dangerous. Once they realize you're onto them, they might get desperate. I thought about the fake letter. About how Diane's mask had slipped. I'm already ahead of you. I showed him my plans for the beach house. The shell company that owned my assets. The escape route I'd built. Gordon nodded approvingly. Smart. Very smart. I found the photo album one night when everyone else was asleep. It was hidden in Diane's luggage, buried under clothes. Inside were photos of me. Dozens of them. Some from before I'd even met Wesley. Me at charity events. Me at my grandmother's funeral. Me at work. They'd been watching me. For years. There was a business card paperclipped to one photo. It belonged to someone at my grandmother's foundation. The person who would have access to donor and beneficiary information. Someone who could identify wealthy targets. That's how they'd found me. Not through Wesley's random chance meeting at a coffee shop like he'd said. Through Diane's research. Through calculated hunting. Wesley had been sent to target me specifically. Our entire relationship was a lie. Every moment, every word, every promise. All of it was part of their plan to steal my inheritance. I contacted a real estate attorney through my LLC. I want to sell my house. Fast sale, cash only, close in 2 weeks. That's aggressive, she said. You'll probably get less than market value. I don't care. I want it sold and untraceable to me. We listed it through a different agent in a different city, to avoid anyone recognizing the property. The listing described it as an estate sale from a deceased owner. No mention of me. No mention of Wesley. Within 3 days we had a cash offer. 10% below market value, but I accepted immediately. The buyer was an investment company flipping houses. They wanted vacant possession in 2 weeks. Perfect. I signed everything through the LLC. Arranged for the title to transfer to the investment company. Made sure every document was airtight. In 2 weeks, Robert, Diane, and Wesley would be living in someone else's house. And they wouldn't know until the new owners showed up. The final trap was almost beautiful in its simplicity. Harold, the fake lawyer, called me with great news. I've found a way to release your trust fund, he said. But you'll need to sign some documents. What kind of documents? Just formalities. Power of attorney. Release forms. Standard stuff. I agreed to meet him. When I arrived at his strip mall office, Robert and Diane were there. Waiting. We thought we should all be present, Diane said. Family decision. They presented me with a folder full of documents. Forms that would give them control of my financial accounts. Papers that would allow them to access my trust fund. Everything they needed to steal everything I had. Wesley was there too, looking uncomfortable but silent. I pretended to read through the papers carefully. This seems like a lot, I said. It's necessary, Harold insisted. I pulled out my phone. Before I sign, let me just check with my attorney. Diane's hand shot out. That's not necessary. Harold is your attorney now. I'd arranged everything perfectly. The movers arrived at exactly 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I'd given them keys and explicit instructions. Pack only the items with Lauren Whitmore's name on them. Pack only things in rooms I'd specifically marked. Leave everything else untouched. Robert, Diane, and Wesley had gone out for breakfast. I'd encouraged them to go, saying I needed quiet time to work. They'd left at 8:30. By 9:45, the movers had everything loaded. My clothes. My laptop. My personal items. Everything that was mine was gone. Everything they'd brought. Everything they'd claimed. Everything of Wesley's. It all stayed. I left one thing on the kitchen counter. An envelope. Inside was a notice from the new property owner. This residence has been sold. Current occupants must vacate within 24 hours per the purchase agreement. Failure to comply will result in legal action. I signed it, the management. Then I walked out the door for the last time. I mailed the package from the post office near my beach house. It was addressed to Wesley, but I knew Diane would open it. Inside was everything they needed to understand what had happened. A copy of the eviction notice. Photos of my beach house, showing me settled and comfortable. A thumb drive containing every recording I'd made. Every conversation about the Brighton funds. Every discussion of their timeline. Every moment where they'd revealed their true intentions. I also included copies of the financial documents Patricia had compiled. Proof of the money Wesley had moved. Evidence of the offshore accounts. Everything that showed this was planned, calculated fraud. And finally, I included a short note. You picked the wrong target. The police have copies of everything on this drive. I suggest you hire a real lawyer this time. Lauren. I dropped it in the mailbox and drove back to my beach house. Let them panic. Let them scramble. Let them feel what I'd felt for months. The arrests happened 3 days later. Gordon called me with the news. The district attorney moved fast. They picked up Robert and Diane this morning. Wesley turned himself in an hour ago. What are the charges? Multiple counts of fraud. Conspiracy. Identity theft. Wire fraud for the offshore accounts. They're looking at serious prison time. I felt a weight lift from my chest. What about the other victims? 2 of them have agreed to testify now that arrests have been made. Paige is still thinking about it, but she's leaning yes. This case is going to be huge. I looked out my window at the ocean. Waves crashed against the shore, constant and cleansing. Thank you, Gordon, for everything. You did most of the work. You protected yourself. That took courage. After we hung up, I sat on my deck with coffee and watched the sunset. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. 6 months later, I was launching my new business from my beach house, Whitmore Security Consulting. We specialized in helping people protect themselves from family fraud, from inheritance targeting, from the kind of long con that Robert, Diane, and Wesley had tried to pull on me. My first client was one of Wesley's previous victims. She'd reached out after seeing news coverage of the arrests. I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else, she said. We helped her recover some of her losses, set up protections for her remaining assets, connected her with a therapist who specialized in financial abuse. The business grew quickly. Apparently, family fraud was more common than anyone wanted to admit. We were helping people document suspicious behavior, secure their assets, build cases against manipulative relatives. I hired Paige to help with client outreach. Gordon joined as our chief investigator. We were turning our trauma into purpose, our pain into protection for others. I stood on my deck one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. My phone buzzed with a notification. Wesley had been sentenced. 8 years. His parents got 12 each. Justice had been served. But more than that, I was free. Free from their manipulation. Free from their lies. Free to build something real. The woman who'd almost lost everything now spent her days helping others keep what was theirs. And that felt like the best revenge of all.